All right. Very good morning to everybody who's joined us today. If you're joining us from Europe, it's definitely morning for you, and we have a few guests who have joined us from the Middle East as well. Good afternoon to you. My name is Praveen Joseph. I'm a cybersecurity as well as a privacy consultant and trainer here with Ingram Micro Cybersecurity, and I'm very happy to welcome you for today's webinar. The topic for today's webinar is privacy transformation. And what we're going to do is a 2-year review of GDPR specifically. Why did we want to do this particular webinar? What was our motivation for doing this? You probably already know this. On the 25th of May, which was just a little earlier this week, GDPR, the world's toughest privacy regulation, has actually turned 2 years old. It was a very interesting time for us to review how effective GDPR was in achieving its stated objectives. What are the challenges that it faced and still continues to face, and what is the road ahead for GDPR? A lot of things have actually been upset thanks to the pandemic, which is an ongoing crisis, globally speaking right now. What is COVID-19's impact as well on GDPR as well as on the view of privacy as a concept globally? So these are the key topics that we wanted to address specifically on this particular webinar. And on behalf of Ingram Micro Cybersecurity and the entire team here in Dubai as well as in Europe, I'm very happy to welcome you, and let's get going into the session itself. A couple of ground rules, guys. As you can see, we're using Teams, which means you can see everybody else who's on the call with us. You're most welcome to unmute yourself. You're most welcome to speak at any point of time if you wish to exchange your opinions, if you wish to share your expertise as well. We are expecting around not more than 50 people to join this particular session. So feel free to interact, feel free to exchange your views and your opinions. If you're in a noisy environment, feel free to use the chat option because the way in which we have planned this session is the discussions, the slides, and so on would probably go for 45 to 50 minutes, but we will spend dedicated time on going through your feedback, your opinions, and questions. Right. So this is it in terms of ground rules, and of course remember to be on mute if you are not speaking, so that we can have a very smooth experience overall. Right. In terms of what we have lined up from the agenda's perspective, we'll have a quick look at GDPR. Now, I looked at the audience, the people who have registered for today's session, and I know that most of you already come from a cybersecurity background or from a privacy background. Despite this, we will always assume the concept of minimum knowledge, which means we will review the purpose of GDPR itself. What is the regulation? We'll try to cover that at a very high level, and then we're going to jump straight into the meat of the matter, which is we're going to try and understand GDPR's performance review. We will identify what are the KPIs through which one can evaluate GDPR's effectiveness during the last 2 years. And then we will actually look at how GDPR performed vis-a-vis those specific KPIs. We look at data which is derived from reputable sources, and we'll try to benchmark GDPR's performance vis-a-vis what would have been the ideal performance. We'll also look at COVID-19 and the impact of the pandemic on perceptions of privacy itself globally, as well as within the European Union. There's been a recent development, specifically in the case of Hungary, on its approach to GDPR. We will look at this as part of the session. And finally, in bullet point number 4, we will understand what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses of GDPR as a regulation itself, and how well it has succeeded in achieving its stated objectives. And lastly, we'll conclude with a quick introduction to my team, my organization, which is Ingram Micro Cybersecurity, and how we can help you to actually understand GDPR and as well, and not only that, also implement GDPR or any privacy or cybersecurity framework within your organization. This is the agenda for today. Let's get going. Now, what really is GDPR? The General Data Protection Regulation has drastically revamped. It's in fact changed or transformed the way the whole world reviews or considers privacy. Privacy is the ability for you and me as an individual to have control over our own personal data. And GDPR is actually giving us this control. The intent of GDPR strategically was to protect the privacy of people. As more and more, abilities for organizations to invade on people's privacies started expanding, especially within the last 10 years. I'm talking about the big tech firms like, big data driven organizations, Facebook, Google, and so on, they have a lot of data about individuals such as you and me, and they have the ability to spy on us with or without our knowledge. How much control do you and me as individuals have in this particular environment? This control is one of the key objectives of GDPR, enabling individuals, the everyday man, the common citizen, to have control over their personal data. Another strategic intent of GDPR was to ensure that corporations are more accountable for their data management practices. Someone had to hold them up to compliance with specific laws and regulations, and this is what GDPR wanted to achieve. GDPR was heavily updated in the sense it was relevant to present day challenges. Specifically from a technology standpoint, it has components pertaining to cloud computing, online behavior monitoring, targeted advertising, cookies, direct marketing. All of these are the privacy challenges of this particular decade that organizations, that individuals are facing. GDPR considers and addresses each of these in detail. Not only this, it has one of the things which made GDPR excessively famous is the massive amount of fines. In fact, fines are the highest that we've ever witnessed in any privacy regulation so far. 10 or 20 million euro, or 2 or 4% of the total worldwide turnover. Not only this, although it is a European regulation, it had a worldwide applicability based on specific conditions. If you have an establishment which is inside the EU, yes, GDPR applies to you. Not only this, if you are monitoring or offering goods or services to individuals, not citizens, but people within the European Union, no matter where in the world you are, GDPR applies to you. So for this specific reason, the whole world actually sat up and started looking at privacy as a problem that had to be solved, and it had to be solved right now. This was something which GDPR wanted to achieve, and we'll see whether it succeeded in achieving this as part of today's session. Some of the key milestones in GDPR within its very short lifetime of 2 years. Well, to be honest, GDPR is actually 4 years. It's not 2 years. It came into effect in 2018 officially, which is the first milestone that you see on the left of your screen. But the draft bill itself was passed in 2016, and there was a 2-year timeline which was passed, which was allowed for organizations to prepare to comply with GDPR. But it came into effect officially in 2018, 25th of May 2018. We just celebrated 2 years of it. And yes, it replaced a 20-year-old, very, very outdated, very ineffective, obsolete data protection regulation, which was called the Data Protection Directive of 1995. This was very irrelevant to today's technology challenges, and it had to be replaced. GDPR did a very good job at that. Not only this, it brought about a unification of data protection mechanisms across the entire European Union, which was in fact one of the challenges that we used to face in the old days of the Data Protection Directive. Italy would consider privacy in one particular approach and implement it in a specific way. Germany's would be different, Hungary's would be different. Different countries approached privacy in different ways within the European Union itself, which made compliance and measurement of compliance more complicated. GDPR sought to unify the approach towards data protection across the entire European Union, one regulation for the whole of the EU. And it had succeeded in achieving this to a very good extent. We will talk about this as we go down. On 21st of January 2019, GDPR made headlines because Google was fined 50 million euro. To date, this is the highest fine that has actually been effected against an organization under GDPR. There have been higher fines as well against Marriott, against British Airways, which were dished out by the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the DPA of UK. Nevertheless, these fines have been deferred. They have not officially been paid as yet. The highest fine to have been paid so far still remains at 50 million euro, which spoke volumes to the seriousness that the government was actually bringing about towards protection of individuals' privacy. By the way, Google was fined because of lack of valid management of consent of their users, lack of transparency in terms of data management, and so on. 4th December 2019, almost 18 months after GDPR came into official effect, overall compliance, not just within the EU, but globally, overall compliance with GDPR was still not up to the mark, as you can see from this particular statistic here. Only up to 42% of organizations were reported as saying, yes, we are moderately compliant with GDPR, and just less than 10% companies were completely confident that they were fully compliant with GDPR. So yes, organizations were still struggling to achieve compliance even as late as December 2019, just about 5 months ago. On the 1st of Jan 2020, another significant milestone in not only the world of GDPR, but privacy as a whole, is the fact that the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, came into effect. It speaks volumes because, first of all, it applies to the state of California, which is a golden state of the United States. Its GDP is sometimes, it's actually higher than many countries itself. So it speaks volumes for the criticality that privacy was receiving on the agenda of governments itself. And by the way, there's a lot of parallels that CCPA draws from GDPR itself. We'll talk about this as we go down the slides. Not only California, not only the US, but countries around the world have also started bringing about privacy legislations which mirror a lot of the tenets that you see in GDPR, which is a very, very strong testament to the fact that privacy is a problem that governments world over are looking at addressing right now, right? So with this overview of GDPR in mind, let's jump straight into the core of today's presentation. We're going to try and perform a performance review of GDPR based on the last 2 years. Now, when I was trying to identify how do I evaluate GDPR's performance, the first thing that I needed to address was what are the KPIs, the metrics on the basis of which we can evaluate GDPR's performance. And this is what you see right here. The 4 KPIs that we're going to discuss in detail for today's session: fines, public awareness on privacy itself, data protection officers, as well as global privacy legislations. Why did we select each of these? These are the key differentiators or the key objectives, in fact, of GDPR. The fines, like I mentioned earlier, they're the highest that any privacy legislation has brought about in the history of mankind itself. GDPR, like we saw in one of the earlier slides, it's one of the toughest privacy regulations in the world. It's difficult to comply with. It's holistic. It's all-encompassing. But the fines or the penalties are even more scarier than the thought of having to build a compliance program itself. 10 or 20 million euro, like we'll see in one of the upcoming slides, is one of the key differentiators of GDPR because this is a regulation which actually had teeth compared to its predecessors as well as its peers. How effective was GDPR in enforcing these fines within the last 2 years? How many fines were actually dished out? How many companies paid up? You're going to look at this as one of the metrics, one of the KPIs for evaluating GDPR performance. The second one is awareness of the public on privacy itself. Now, if you're talking to, let's say, a senior citizen who has limited knowledge on technology, I'm just giving a very generic assumption over here. He or she, they would be familiar with downloading apps on their phones, using WhatsApp, using Skype, so on and so forth. How aware are they of how intrusive these apps are on their day-to-day lives? Am I being monitored by Facebook, the app that is running on my phone? I see that I'm getting ads which are very relevant to my conversations that I'm having at home. How much control do I have over my personal data? This is one of the objectives of GDPR, to spread awareness of individuals. How successful was it in achieving this? We'll try to measure this. The third one is data protection officers. This is a new position or a new job title which was created by GDPR with the intent of addressing the problem of talent shortage. Qualified and experienced privacy professionals who are able to lead an organization's compliance roadmap, compliance framework. This is a major shortage that organizations are facing worldwide. GDPR sought to address this by creating a new position called the Data Protection Officer. How many organizations actually hired DPOs? How many organizations have not only hired, but also empowered them, given them the authorities, given them the seniority level to perform their day-to-day duties? This is another KPI that we can define for evaluating GDPR's performance. And the last one, building on what I just mentioned about the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, how many countries around the world started waking up to the need for privacy, reading GDPR and building and enacting privacy laws? Similar to GDPR, stronger than GDPR, weaker than GDPR, different ways of evaluating it. We'll do this as part of the 4th KPI. So this is the key agenda for today's session, guys. We will be sticking to a strict timeline, so I will try to go a little fast in some sections, but dwell more in those areas which are very important. For those who've joined us late, the same rules apply. Any point of time, you're free to unmute yourself. You're free to share your opinions, your views. Healthy challenges, absolutely yes. Let's keep it an interactive conversation. If you're in a noisy environment, let me repeat, please feel free to use the chat window. Type in your questions, comments as we go down the slides. All right, and the last 10 minutes I will be dedicating specifically for addressing your questions, your feedback, and your comments, which have come through the chat window. All right. The first KPI that we're going to look at is fines. Like you see over here on this particular slide, the fining landscape of GDPR is very clearly cut out. Depending upon the type of violation, you have two levels of fines. 10 million euro or 2% of total worldwide annual turnover for the fines for violations rather pertaining to applying data protection by design, data protection by default, engagement of service providers by control, which is nothing but processors by controllers, carrying out data protection impact assessments, hiring DPOs, maintaining records of processing, managing data breaches, notifying the impacted individuals about the fact that there's been a data breach, managing consent pertaining to children, data security, so on and so forth. So most of the infringements that an organization may perform against GDPR, which can be considered less violent, less critical, I would say, or less serious, they fall within the lower bucket of 10 million euro. Now, it's not like I didn't notify my customers of the fact that there's been a breach. I'm automatically entitled for a fine of 10 million euro. This is not the case. For every case by case, an analysis has to be made before a court decides upon what is the final value of the fine to be paid to an organization. In fact, the smallest fine that has been paid is just about 90 euros. And the highest fine, we saw it earlier, is 50 million euro, which was given over to GDPR, to Google by GDPR. As well as we have fines pending from British Airways and Marriott to the tune of 200 million euro or so. So depending upon the case, the case has to be evaluated. The nature, the context of the processing, how cooperative is the organization with the data protection authority. All of these facts have to be assessed individually, and accordingly the fine amount has to be estimated. Of course, in the higher bucket, you see fines of 20 million euro or 4%. For more critical, more serious infringements pertaining to processing sensitive personal data or special categories of personal data, not adhering with the authority of the Data Protection Authority, cross-border or international transfer of personal data, lawfulness of processing, consent, etc., etc. So these, in fact, when you go through the regulation, you'll see that these areas, cross-border data transfers, lawfulness of processing, fairness, transparency, all of these are, in fact, the fundamental pillars of GDPR itself, and they are what build the regulation. They are what make it unique and strong. So if there are violations on these particular domains, yes, the fines are also going to be higher. All right. Now, this is what the regulation has spelled out. How effective was this in practice? Let's try to read over here. So the total value of fines which GDPR issued, just a second. Yes. The total value of the fines that GDPR issued between the last 2 years is what you see over here. Very significant amount, but you see that most of it is pertaining to the 300 million euro, which was given out to Marriott as well as to British Airways. Most of the other fines are within the less than hundreds, within the few thousands, in fact. Out of 230, a total of 237 fines have been issued between July 2018 and May 2020. So up to this month, as we speak, a total of 237 fines have only been issued. All right, so let's keep these numbers in mind, and we'll look at, we'll compare it with other metrics on the next slide. Which countries are topping the list in terms of issuing fines? UK, France, as well as Italy. UK with just 3 fines, it's coming up to 300 million euro because of the fines which have been issued to British Airways as well as Marriott for their violations. France, the Data Protection Authority of France is called CNIL, and they are in fact the entity which issued the fine to Google. So 50 million plus euro that you see over here. Italy has also dished out fines to the tune of 39 million euro that you see over here, 11 fines over here. The top violations by organizations which attracted fines: lawfulness of processing. In fact, you saw this on the previous slide. This is a violation which can attract 20 million euro or 4% of your total worldwide annual turnover. Information security, 10 million euro. Data protection principles, 20. Data subject rights, 20. Information obligations, 10. So on. It's cooperation with supervisory authority, 20. Breach notification is 10. DPO is 10, and so on. So depending upon the nature of each case, the fine value had to be calculated, and you see that overall 467 million euro is the value of the fines that have been issued, and the number of fines is 237. Now let's compare this with a very, very important metric. How many breaches or how many complaints were actually reported to the data protection authorities within the last 2 years? right? This is one way in which we can evaluate the performance of or the effectiveness of these fines. In fact, you see that 161,000 personal data breaches were reported to the European Economic Area DPAs between May 2018 and Jan of this year. 161,000 data breaches. Data breaches, like we saw earlier, regarding the handling of these data breaches, of fines can be 10 million euro or 2% of your total worldwide annual turnover, right? So when you multiply that with 161,000, you should be seeing a much, much higher value of the fines to be issued. Unfortunately, only 237 fines have been issued for a total of 161,000 reported data breaches. Of course, data breach is just one issue. There are multiple other violations which can be fined potentially. So there is a huge disparity between the number of reported issues and the actual value of GDPR fines that were dished out. What does this mean? A way for us to infer this is data protection authorities, they are not able to deal with the huge volume of incoming complaints, incoming reports of personal data breaches. And when you dig deeper, you'll find that this is a fact. This is in fact a reality. For example, in the United Kingdom, the ICO has 500 to 600 employees. The total population of the UK is 66 million. So for 66 million people who can potentially complain or issue complaints about personal data protection, we only have about 500 to 600 people, right? So there's a huge lack of funding that the DPAs are suffering from. And in fact, you will see this in one of the reports given by this organization, Brave, a report which they wrote in just April 27, 2020. Right. So this is one side in terms of funding for the data protection authorities that GDPR is facing a real challenge within the last 2 years. Another interesting trend that you'll observe is that when you talk about privacy, the first names that would come to your mind would be Facebook, Google, Amazon, and then of course Microsoft. FAGMA, the big tech companies, how many of these organizations have actually been fined? Only Google, right? Facebook did pay out a huge fine of 500,000 euro in relation to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, but this was before GDPR came into effect. Post GDPR, Facebook is yet to see a huge fine. Of course, Google has seen the fines. Amazon, Microsoft, they have not yet seen any massive fines. Are they really that good in terms of protecting their privacy? I don't know. But the fact is they have very, very qualified armies of data protection experts, privacy experts, tech experts, and so on. How does a DPA or a data protection authority compare with the privacy teams of the big tech companies? In fact, DPAs, you'll see when you look at the data, only 6 out of 28 DPAs. Every European Union country, every EU nation has one DPA, by the way. So we have 28 DPAs. Only 6 of them have more than 10 technology specialists, which means they are lacking in expertise. They are more or less inclined to be hesitant to challenge the big tech companies and would probably go for the low-lying fruit, the easier targets. This is another potential risk that we are seeing, again, because of lack of sufficient funding for data protection authorities. You'll see these details as well verified in the Brave Insights report of April 2020, right? So a conclusion that we can draw from this particular analysis, GDPR fines are high, they are scary, but they have not been effectively implemented within the last 2 years. There is still a long way to go before we can actually achieve the true value of GDPR's heavily high fines. The second KPI is in terms of public awareness on privacy. Now, there is a key tenet of privacy which differentiates it from a similar domain, which is security. In security, I'm trying to protect data of individuals, of organizations, etc., from unknown hackers, right? But in privacy, I am focused entirely on protecting people's personal data from known established corporations, governments, whatnot, right? Security is in fact considered a subset within privacy. You cannot have privacy without security, but you can have security without privacy. So the person or the individual or the data subject, so to speak, is at the core of any privacy ecosystem. Unless they know what privacy is, unless they know their rights in terms of privacy and how they're actually being infringed by organizations that they have a relationship with, GDPR is not going to be fully successful. So this is the second KPI. How successful was GDPR in making people, the general public, aware on privacy as a concept, as a problem, and their rights in relation to privacy. This is something that we'll have to try and evaluate. So like I said, the concept of GDPR, the concept of privacy is centered around the data subject itself, and it protects the individuals. If people are not aware, GDPR is not bound to succeed. In fact, individuals have a lot of specific rights under GDPR, which are what we call the data subject rights. I have a right as a data subject to request a copy of my data, to object to processing, to be notified if my data has been breached. And if you're going to send my data outside of the European Union, I should be informed, I should give you consent towards this. Right. So there are multiple clauses which GDPR has called out. Unless individuals know about these rights that GDPR has given to them, it's not bound to succeed. Not only just does GDPR give them rights, it also gives them duties, specific so-called expected behaviors, right? Which is not clearly spelled out, but it is implied. Individuals should be aware of their rights under GDPR. They should read the privacy statements. We don't just scroll down and say, yes, I agree to terms and conditions. Unless I have a mindset which is more in line with protecting my privacy, what uses all these rights which GDPR is giving to me, right? So I should be more privacy conscious as a data subject. When I'm downloading an app, I should go through the entire privacy policy, scroll all the way down, read everything, and then only consent. And I should know what is it that I'm consenting to. If I see that there is any violation of my privacy rights, I should go proactively to the data protection authority of my specific country, whether it's Italy, whether it's Hungary, France, whatever it is, and I should report the violation to them. We saw on the previous slide 161,000 breaches have been reported, but we are very sure that the numbers could be way higher than this, right? So how effective has GDPR been in enabling people, making them more aware on their privacy specific rights? Well, the numbers are actually positive. They are encouraging. In fact, you see from this particular report, which was released by the European Commission itself on a press release, 73% Europeans have heard of at least one data subject right which GDPR has bestowed upon them. This is very positive. This is good. 73 is 3/4. That's almost 3/4. So we are happy about this. Public is more inclined to be aware of what rights GDPR has given to them. I have a right to object to my processing. I have a right to request a copy of my data. This is good because when people know about these rights, they're more likely to draw benefit from these rights. Another statistic is that only 57% of data subjects actually know who their National Data Protection Authority or their DPA is. Unless I know my first point of contact when I have a privacy-related problem, I'm not going to do anything about these problems. So the numbers 57% is not too bad, but it could of course be a lot better. From the same report, the same press release, which was released by the European Commission, June last year. This is the latest statistic that we have. So we feel that this year the numbers could probably be 60-65%, but we have to wait for the official confirmation in probably June 2020. But as we can see, public awareness on GDPR, on privacy itself as a concept, this is good, it is improving, and there is some encouragement that we see over here. All right, the next KPI for evaluation of GDPR's performance is in relation to data protection authorities. Now, who really is a data protection officer? Guys, when GDPR was yet to be a thing, I would say sometime around 2017, there was a lot of hype around this new position that GDPR has created. It is called the data protection officer, a new position of a privacy champion who is expected to define, execute, and lead the privacy management program of an organization. This person has to be a privacy champion, sponsor the entire program, and execute it, of course, with the management's approval and their sponsorship. So the DPO has multiple responsibilities, educating the individuals internal to the organization as well as the customers about their data subject specific rights, advise the management about what are the privacy responsibilities of the organization, what is the plan for achieving and meeting these responsibilities. He also has to be proactively assessing the security posture of the organization, protecting the personal data of individuals, of customers that the organization is processing, and also on an ongoing basis, monitor compliance with GDPR. If there is any data security breach, the DPO is responsible for notifying the DPA wherever it is applicable, and depending upon the case, depending upon the risk that is posed to the rights and freedoms of the affected individuals, the DPO would have to be at the forefront of managing this notification process to affected individuals as well. DPO will be the single point of contact between an organization and the data protection authority of that country, right? So he has to liaise, he or she, they have to liaise with the data protection authorities, right? Some of the benefits, they report to the highest levels of management. They have access to trainings and all the resources that are required for them to upgrade their skills, to upskill themselves, and be fully qualified to carry out their job. They also have to operate with a full level of independence without any conflict of interest. And of course, they can be an in-house employee or they can be an outsourced employee as well. So there's no requirement in GDPR that your DPO has to be 100% in-house. He or she, they could be an outsourced employee as well. Now, how effective has the DPO position been in achieving GDPR compliance within organizations? Well, the numbers are not too bad if you think about it. In 2017, the prediction was that GDPR would create as many as 75,000 DPO positions just in Europe as well, just only in Europe, right? This was a prediction by IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals. But the actual numbers far outgrew this particular estimate. In fact, you'll see that more than 500,000 European companies have actually registered DPOs, which is 6 times the forecasted value, right? More than 72% companies worldwide have actually appointed a data protection officer, and this is very good. So this means that companies have actually, at least 3/4 of companies have actually gone ahead and appointed data protection officers. So this is a very positive and encouraging sign. Not only have they appointed them, but they've also given them sufficient seniority to carry out their jobs. So in most cases, the DPO is considered to be the privacy leader within the organization, like you see in this particular statistic. In up to 45% cases, the DPO is the privacy leader within the organization, right? So what we see over here, there is a huge demand created for the DPO positions by GDPR. Many organizations are running or racing, in fact, to fill this position to ensure that they are compliant with the regulation. Not only this, they are giving the DPOs the necessary powers to carry out their jobs in terms of seniority levels, in terms of access to their resources. This is very clear from the data that you see over here. So in conclusion, DPO has been a successful KPI, successful achievement for GDPR in terms of fulfilling its obligations towards helping organizations comply. The next KPI is how have countries or governments worldwide woken up to privacy as a problem post GDPR? Now, what you see over here is a world map from DLA Piper, where we are grading or we are rating the privacy protection programs or regulations in place for different countries, for different regions around the world. So red is where you see there is heavy regulation and enforcement of privacy legislation within the countries. And then you have the other colors as well. What you see here is a very, very encouraging sign. Privacy has actually been enacted as a legislation in around 80 countries globally. 80 countries is not a very bad number. And in fact, GDPR, you'll see in one of the upcoming slides, GDPR has actually kicked off a revolution around privacy because countries, governments around the world have started waking up and they've started deploying privacy regulations, which are similar to GDPR, stronger than GDPR or weaker than GDPR. That is case by case. But yes, there is privacy regulation that is being enacted. Not only this, countries which do not have the resources to have their own privacy regulations, they want to be compliant with GDPR because they have strong business ties or economic national ties with the European Union. We saw this earlier. GDPR has an extraterrestrial clause, which means extraterritorial clause, which means that even if there's a country outside of the European Union, if it is processing data belonging to people within the EU, if it is offering goods to them or monitoring them, goods or services, monitoring whatever, GDPR would apply to them. So in order to ensure that trade relations are maintained and are not cut off just because of GDPR compliance issues, there are governments which have taken compliance as a serious issue. And even if they don't have the resources for their own privacy regulations, they are taking efforts to comply with GDPR. So again, from the extraterritorial clause, GDPR has made a significant impact worldwide to improve privacy legislation. What is the data telling us? Now, post GDPR, what are the new privacy related laws that have come into effect? Now, I'll tell you this, when you look at this list over here, You won't see the most advanced nations of the world, like, for example, Australia, Japan, Canada, Singapore, etc. Because these countries, they already had privacy regulations, even prior to 2018. So they have modified, they have made some improvements in relation to GDPR. For example, in terms of Canada, they have made themselves more aligned because of the stricter regulations brought about by GDPR. But what countries have come out with new privacy regulations? This is what we are trying to look at in this slide. Post GDPR, which countries came out with privacy regulations? If you look at it, we had the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is a state-specific privacy regulation within the US. US, the scenario is very different. They have privacy laws for depending upon sectors, depending upon government or private sectors, and so on, and specific industries as well. So the landscape is very complex and it's very difficult to navigate. The CCPA, which pertains to California, it is a very, very landmark development in terms of not only the privacy landscape of the state, but the world itself, because California is where you have a $3 trillion GDP. So much of the world which does business with the US, they do business with the state of California itself. So CCPA, which came into effect in Jan 2020, is a significant development. Brazil had the LGPD, which was required, which was actually supposed to come into effect just about right now. But thanks to the pandemic, it's been postponed to next year, May 2021. A lot of similarities with GDPR in the Americas. From the Asian perspective, India and Thailand have also come out with their own data protection legislations. And in fact, you'll see that in the case of Thailand, the Personal Data Protection Act, very, very heavy similarities to GDPR. In the case of India, it's not very, very aligned with GDPR. It has its own requirements, more pertaining to the internal environment of the country. In the Middle East, we have a lot of in fact, all the GCC countries are, as we speak, they are working on a privacy regulation. In fact, the UAE, where I'm speaking to you from here in Dubai, we are expecting a privacy law, which was supposed to have come out just at least in Q1 of this year, but we have still yet to see it being enacted. We eagerly await the UAE data protection law to come into effect, hopefully later this year. In Bahrain, we already have the personal data protection law, which came into effect August last year. Very, very heavy parallels with GDPR. Lastly, in Africa, different countries, I think about 19 countries have data protection laws similar to what you have in GDPR. Nigeria is just one example that I'm showing you over here, where the Nigerian data protection regulation enacted Jan 2019, very, very heavy similarities with GDPR. So the inference that we can draw over here is that GDPR is absolutely guiding and inspiring the privacy landscape worldwide. It is giving a guideline for governments, for organizations worldwide to actually enact privacy into their constitutions, into their policies, and whatnot. All right, now before we perform the final evaluation of all of the KPIs that we went through, let's take a look at a current issue, COVID-19. How can we not talk about COVID-19? Now, the general sentiment that we have been witnessing ever since the pandemic started to play out and, of course, disrupt day-to-day life as we know it, the general sentiment that we've seen is individuals and organizations, governments as well in some cases, are viewing privacy as a luxury, as a very, very good thing to have, which is not necessary, which is not an important problem right now. If you want to solve the problem of COVID-19, we'll have to engage in joint and communal sharing of not only personal data, but sensitive personal data. If an individual has been infected with COVID-19, it is possible to protect those around them only when everybody knows that this individual has been infected. This goes exactly against what privacy regulations and GDPR as well are seeking to achieve. Especially when we talk about health information, this is sensitive personal data. If you remember, in one of the earlier slides, we saw that sensitive personal data, when you're processing this, the fines for any violations, any infringements, can go to the tune of the higher bracket, 20 million euro or 4% of the total worldwide annual turnover. So health information is absolutely sensitive personal data, and GDPR calls for a lot of work when an organization is going to process this. Right now, as we're going through the crisis of the pandemic, this is probably not a problem to have. This is the mindset that we are seeing organizations as well as governments approaching, not the majority, but a few minority of them. What are the top concerns in relation to privacy when we're talking about a COVID-19 or a pandemic-related environment? The first one is What are the privacy requirements associated with employees working remotely? Currently, even right now, I'm speaking to you from my house. All of us are working remotely. What are the privacy requirements in relation to, for example, employee monitoring? If an organization wants to monitor their employees, how can they do so without invading the challenges that organizations have to address? The second one is, we spoke about the data subject rights. If an individual is requesting access to his or her personal data from an organization, they are required to respond to it within 30 days under GDPR, right? Given the current context and the crisis that organizations are going through, this 30-day cutoff period might seem a little too tight, a little too harsh. Can we relax this during the current crisis? This is a key concern. And the last concern is in relation to employees' health information. If I, as an organization, want to open my doors again to my employees and want them to come and start working within the office, how much information related to employees' health can I collect? Because I'll be monitoring their temperatures and whatnot. If someone has been infected, maybe I'd like to know as well about the details. So how much me as an organization can I collect about my employees' health information while at the same time protecting their privacy? So remote working, requests for data subject rights in terms of collecting their data subject access requests, as well as monitoring employees' health information, collecting or monitoring employees' health information. These are the top 3 privacy concerns that organizations are looking at in the light of the pandemic. And in fact, an interesting development just a couple of weeks ago was that the Hungarian government had suspended GDPR data subject access rights. So what really did it do was individuals' access rights to their data. This has been paused because the country has officially announced that they're going through an emergency period. So just a few weeks back, I think 2 weeks ago, the government announced that they are suspending people's rights to data subject access requests, right to erasure of their data. This is also paused, and also the right to access a judicial remedy in case of any GDPR violation. This is also going to be postponed. It's going to be delayed. You don't have immediate access to judicial remedy if there is any GDPR related violation that an individual has reported to the DPA. So multiple data subject rights have been suspended by the Hungarian government in light of the COVID-19 crisis, the emergency that we're going through. And this is now being reviewed, right? We don't know if other countries are going to follow suit as well. Probably not. We are yet to see how things are going to play out. Another important area, another key word that we've been seeing playing out recently is this concept of contact tracing. A lot of countries have already started deploying contact tracing apps. How can they ensure that these contact tracing apps are achieving their intended purposes while at the same time protecting the privacy of their individuals, of the citizens and the residents within these countries? How does a contact tracing app work, first of all? I don't know how many of you have already installed these apps, but just to let you know how this works, when two individuals interact or they meet physically, these apps, which are already pre-installed on their phones, will exchange specific tokens, probably over Bluetooth, with each other. So Bluetooth has to be turned on your phone, and a device ID or a unique ID which represents you as a user, as a unique resident within a country, would be exchanged with that of the other person. Now, if in future, let's say within 2 days or 5 days, the individual has tested positive for COVID-19, they would be required to update the app with this new setting, with their new status that of the fact that they've been COVID-19 positive. So within the last n number of days, any individual who has come in contact with this particular person, they are required to be notified. Very high level, this is how contact tracing is supposed to work. Now, this is a very high level paradigm, but there are multiple dimensions to it. Governments might want to get too intrusive in terms of what details they're collecting. How much control do the citizens have in this particular landscape? So for instance, if someone has been tested positive COVID-19 and this is going to be reported to all the other individuals, how much control do they have? Do I need to consent towards sharing my health information with the other individuals? If it is going to be shared, will my identity also be shared, or will it be anonymous? Depending upon the country, depending upon the approach of the government towards privacy, we are seeing different scenarios. So we have Apple and Google, which are working towards a new contact tracing solution in the US. which by default will be pushed to all users of their operating systems on their mobile phones. So yes, they have vouched towards protecting privacy and ensuring that individuals have specific control by consenting towards their health information being shared, as well as their identities being kept anonymous. In the case of the European Union, multiple contact tracing apps are being launched by different governments, different countries, of course. But there are 8 specific principles which mirror the privacy requirements or privacy tenets of GDPR. All of these 8 principles have to be matched, have to be met by each app which is going to come out within European Union countries. In India, we have an app which is called the Arogya Setu app as well. Is it reporting cases based on consent? No, but yes, identity of individuals is being maintained anonymous. In South Korea, we have 2 specific apps, Corona 100 meters and Corona Map as well. Corona 100 meters will let you know if you've been within 100 meters radius of a COVID-19 positive individual, as well as Corona Map will help you to, it's similar to Google Maps. It just shows you which areas are hotspots or green zones or red zones or so on in terms of COVID-19 positive cases. So again, there is limited control that individuals have. In Singapore, there's another app called the Trace Together app. It's in fact seen limited number of downloads compared to the overall population because people have reported, concerns about their privacy and in terms of surveillance and so on. It's also not very, privacy centric. It's not very privacy focused. It's more focused in terms of controlling the pandemic. How do we as privacy professionals take or address this particular situation? How are we supposed to view this from an ethical and from a moral perspective? It is a fact that COVID-19, if we are to defeat this virus, it will be on the basis of communal sharing of data. So privacy is going to take a backseat, and this is a reality. What we can do is ensure that individuals are aware, at least people or citizens know what level of their privacy they are giving up when they use these apps. So at least improve or inform the individuals about their data which they're going to give out when they're using these apps. This is the maximum that we have to do, or the bare minimum we have to do to protect privacy from this particular scenario. All right, so the final verdict in terms of GDPR's performance within the last 2 years, how did GDPR perform against the KPIs that we mentioned? The fines were the first area that we reviewed. We saw that just about 237 fines have been dished out, whereas there's been more than 161,000 privacy breaches that were reported to the Data Protection Authority. So huge disparity. Also, the total values of the fines, although they are high, we don't see the top culprits, potential culprits, I would say, the big 4, the big tech companies, rather, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and so on. They've not been fined enough, is a verdict that we see. So we feel that fines should be enforced a lot stricter. We need to see bigger fines and, more fines itself. In terms of public awareness on privacy, we saw that individuals know at least one of their data subject rights, but many of them, they still don't know who the Data Protection Authority is. Just about 50% of the people actually know who the DPA is. So we'll give that a yellow. There still is a lot of improvement that needs to be done to improve the average citizen, the average person's awareness on their privacy rights and their privacy duties as well. DPOs, we saw that this position is in fact a success. I wouldn't say a roaring success, but it is showing a lot of promise. DPOs are being hired by organizations. There's been a 6-time increase in the actual number of DPO positions filled when compared with the number of DPO positions forecasted in 2017. So we were expecting 70 to 75,000 DPO positions, but the actual figures is more than 500K. Right, so DPO positions are actually working out very well, and we see that organizations are taking GDPR seriously, hiring the DPOs, and not only that, they are also empowering them to fulfill their stated duties, their stated job responsibilities. So this is a very, very encouraging and positive sign. Also, the last KPI that we saw was in terms of global privacy legislations, which mirror GDPR, which are as strict as GDPR. We are seeing very, very positive developments on these perspectives as well. We looked at the privacy laws, starting with CCPA in the US, as well as across different regions. We looked at India, we looked at Thailand, we looked at Nigeria, and so on. So we saw that different countries are coming out with privacy legislations. Either they're already in effect right now, or they're going to be coming out soon after COVID-19, like we saw in the case of Brazil. So GDPR has definitely changed the way the world views privacy and has also brought about steps for organizations, for governments to enforce privacy legislation. So this is a good sign as well. In conclusion, when we review the last 2 years of GDPR, what do we have to say? We feel GDPR is a success, but it is still work in progress. There still are areas that need to be addressed. There still is more funding that needs to come for DPAs. Public awareness needs to be improved. But it has shown promise in several other domains, like we saw in bullet points 3 and 4 over here. So this is the overall conclusion that we feel from the last 2 years of GDPR being in force globally. So guys, who are we? You should have known this by now. We are Ingram Micro Cybersecurity. Ingram Micro is the largest tech distributor on the planet, $50 billion company with 35,000 employees all over the world. I'm speaking to you from the Ingram Micro Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. We have our base here in Dubai, as well as we have offices in Europe, in the Netherlands, as well as in Germany and in Switzerland, in Serbia, and so on. We are advanced solution providers in cybersecurity as well as in privacy. In fact, what you see here are the tools that we have developed within our COE, Discovery Virtual Labs, Cybergram, multi-vendor architectures, and so on. We have a team of qualified and experienced cybersecurity experts located in our offices here in Dubai as well as in Europe. We have a holistic solutions and service portfolio which cuts across people, processes, as well as technologies. So for people, we offer a lot of trainings. Like you see over here, we have foundational trainings for people who are new to the concepts of security and privacy. And then we have advanced trainings, for example, in CISSP, which is the most advanced cybersecurity or information security certification. We also are a direct partner with the International Association of Privacy Professionals. We are offering CIPPE as well as CIPM certification trainings. In fact, I myself am a fellow of information privacy with the IAPP, offering these trainings since the last almost 3 years right now. In terms of processes, we offer technical assessments, consultancy, as well as managed security services, vulnerability assessments, penetration tests. If you've been hit by ransomware or any other cybersecurity attack, we are the guys that you can go to. Just give us a call and we'll be there to help you to recover your business from this particular incident. We also have professionals who have years of consulting experience, information security, cybersecurity, as well as GDPR consulting services. We offer these. And lastly, from the technology perspective, like I said, we are the largest tech distributor in the world. Any cybersecurity vendor you can think of, we already have a relationship with them. We are distributing them as long as you're a major organization with sufficient reputation and capabilities. This brings me to the conclusion of today's session. I hope you really found it useful and enjoyable. Get in touch with us at any point of time if you wish to take the conversation further. Let me see if you have any questions, any comments. If you're not put them in, please start typing them straight away into the chat window. And you're also free to unmute yourselves, like I said. Feel free to speak to us at any point of time with your opinions and views. So we have a question from Pratibha. Is GDPR more popular than regulations of other countries? Or is it because we are in the EMEA region that we feel it is more important than the others? Okay, very good question, Pratibha. Thank you so much. Let's try to address this question from a holistic perspective. So we saw that different countries, different regions, they have their own data protection regulations. Why is GDPR so popular? But by the way, the answer to your question, Pratibha, is the answer is yes. It is in fact more popular. But why is this the case? We'll have to try to understand this. First of all, it comes from the European Union, which is a region, historically speaking, right from the post-World War II days, I'd say 50, 60 years ago, the European Union has been known to have a culture of privacy driven into the society itself. Privacy has been recognized as a fundamental human right all over the European Union, right from the post-World War II days itself. So privacy is a historical aspect of life in the European Union. This is one part of the answer. The other part is the European Union itself has trade relations, political relations, and so on with almost the entire world. So for this reason, the rest of the world looks up to the EU for any leadership or any pioneering thoughts in relation to privacy. So not only here in the EMEA region, but also all over the world, countries have strong relations with the European Union, and they look up to the EU nations for any aspects pertaining to privacy. Take this environment, on top of this, add GDPR, a regulation which was not only strong, but also had teeth, thanks to the fines, 10, 20 million euro. This actually made nations all over the world wake up and take privacy seriously. So for this reason, GDPR was actually a game changer, a pioneer in the world of privacy, globally speaking itself. And for this reason, it has achieved a lot of popularity compared with those of other countries. If you take the privacy regulation of India or let's say Brazil or China for that matter, these privacy regulations don't have this extraterritorial clause. India's data protection bill applies only to entities within India. Similarly for Nigeria and so on. But GDPR is different because it applies to the whole world based on specific conditions, if they're doing business with EU nations, if they're processing data pertaining to EU individuals and so on. So for this reason, it's seen a lot of popularity worldwide. I hope that answers, Pratibha. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Still have 5 minutes. It couldn't have been so clear that we just have one question. All right, so if there is no further questions, let me, on behalf of Ingram Micro Cybersecurity, the whole team here, thank you so much for attending, for joining us today, and we hope the session was useful. We will be sharing the recording on our YouTube channel as well, which is Ingram Micro Cybersecurity. Just search for Ingram Micro Cybersecurity on YouTube, you'll find us. Let's spread the word about privacy, about GDPR as well as security, and thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe. Thank you.